Hey guys, tonight we step into a dimly lit monastery cloister where incense curls like lazy snakes and candlelight trembles on ancient stone. You hear the drip of wax and the hiss of earlier experiments echoing in vaulted arches. The air is thick with dust, sweat, and a hint of metallic promise, and you probably won't survive this quest for gold without a few singed eyebrows. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments below, because I want to know who's joining this midnight raid. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Okay, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across flagstones worn smooth by pilgrim feet, drawn by whispers that these cloisters harbor secrets older than your phone's battery life. In the 12th century, monks in abbeys from Spain to England quietly tinkered with flasks and furnaces, hoping to coax base metals into gleaming gold. By day, they chanted psalms. By night, they chased chrysopoeia, the art of metal transmutation, that promised both riches and divine insight. Historians still argue whether these efforts were earnest scientific inquiry or coded spiritual allegory, but you can almost taste the tension between faith and folly in the cold stone corridors. A hooded figure kneels beside a glowing brazier, peering into a bubbling alembic. The smell of burning pitch and scorched oak mingles with acrid fumes of heated mercurius slick, silvery liquid that promises power but often steals health instead. This is no sanitized lab. Metal dust floats in motes, and the monk's fingertips gleam gold-tinged from countless trial runs. You jokingly wonder if the medieval equivalent of bring your kid to work day involved lead poisoning. Light joke number 1. At least they didn't have fire marshals. You lean closer as the alchemist scribbles illegible symbols in Latin and Arabican homage to Jabir ibn Hayyan, the so-called father of chemistry, whose 8th century treatises trickled into European hands through Sicilian translators. It's remarkable that crusading armies and trade caravans inadvertently fueled these experiments. Historians still argue whether the motivation was spiritual purification or sheer lust for bullion. You can almost hear the monks debating if their purified quicksilver mirrored the soul's own refinement. Your senses tingle as you watch the alembic exhale its vapors into a condenser coil. Drippings of distilled water gather in a glass vial, each drop a talisman of potential perfection. Some scribes claimed that deer antlers crushed into powder would catalyze transmutation, utterly fringe theory. Yet one they pursued with religious fervor. Quirky tidbit: a few believed salamanders born in fire could impart their mythical resilience to alloys, though no salamander ever resurfaced to confirm the rumor. A low murmur drifts from the scriptorium where sacred texts and alchemical recipes are copied by candlelight. Illuminated manuscripts glow with golden leaf and cryptic diagrams wheels, and interlocking circles that hint at processes more arcane than your daily coffee order. You note that parchment was scarce and costly, so each diagram is precious enough to spark clandestine exchanges under the cover of darkness. Light joke number 2. It's like swapping artisanal NFTs. NFTs were really heavy and smelled faintly of mildew. You pass a small alcove where empty vials and crucibles line rough planks. Some bear scorch marks, so intense they resemble miniature volcanoes, evidence that a faster flame sometimes seemed the easiest route to enlightenment. The monks whispered of an elixir that healed wounds and extended life, yet few survived long enough to testify. Historians still argue whether these elixirs were herbal brews or simply potent alcohol spiked with mercury, definitely not the kind of happy hour you'd Instagram as you move toward a narrow doorway carved with a cross. You sense the dual lure of material wealth and spiritual transcendence that drove these medieval seekers. They believed gold wasn't just money, but a mirror of divine perfection. Pure metal reflected purity of soul, they thought, and by mastering metals, they could master themselves. Fringe theorists later implied that the real goal was teleportation or unlocking hidden dimensions, no evidence. But an entertaining notion when you're half asleep. Light joke number 3. They probably would have loved TikTok challenges had they not been so busy distilling salamander's sweat. A sudden gust rattles the wooden shutters, sending motes swirling in a shaft of pale moonlight. You pause, heart fluttering, feeling like an intruder in a world that balanced on the edge of revelation and disaster. Remember that burnt crucible you glimpsed near the entrance? It's a reminder that ambition in these cloisters often meant singed robes or worse. Yet, as you step back into shadow, you sense the ancient allure intact. The promise that in these hallowed halls, base matter could become something divine, and that you, too, might glimpse alchemy's secret, if only you dared linger a moment longer. You slip through a narrow archway where the chanting fades and a different kind of hush settles in. One heavy with steam and the whisper of hissing metals. Your fingers graze damp stone walls polished smooth by centuries of secret passage. Flickering. Sconces cast quivering shadows, and you realize this is no mere storage corridor, but the hidden heart of alchemical ambition. In many medieval monasteries, cloister cellars doubled as rudimentary laboratories, insulated against prying eyes and the chill of night, where monks could indulge their metallurgical fantasies beyond the prying gaze of abbots and inquisitors. Historians still argue whether these underground chambers were primarily for alchemy or simple metallurgy. A low stone bench groans under the weight of a dozen crucibles, each scored with concentric rings to grip tongs. Some are half buried in ash, their rims crusted with slag from long-ago tests. You crouch beside a massive earthenware furnace, Athanor whose slow, steady heat once simmered mixtures for days on end. The dull orange glow from leftover embers reveals metal spoons, glass alembics, and twisted copper tubes tracing along the wall like roots. Modern lab tech could never rival the artisanal charm here, you muse. Light joke number 1. Who needs a Bunsen burner when you've got monk-fired coals and questionable ventilation? Thick flasks filled with murky liquids bubble atop iron tripods. In one vial, you spot a slimy, half-submerged root mandrake, plucked at midnight and rumored to scream when torn from the earth. Fringe lore insisted that its cry would shatter glass and drive listeners to madness. Still, it starred in dozens of alchemical recipes. Nearby, a tarnished alembic bears an inscription in Arabic, a nod to the legacy of Jabir and his drive to systematize chemical processes. You inhale the stench of burning sulfur mixed with something sweet and sickly, likely vinegar reacting with metal shavings. Ragged manuscripts lie strewn across a damp table. Diagrams sketched in charcoal depict a crucible crowned by a cap of golden leaf, supposedly to trap auric spirits rising from molten lead. Another sheet illustrates the 4 classical elements schematized as interlocking triangles: earth, water, air, fire. You trace a finger over the lines, half expecting a hidden message to glow. Quirky tidbit. A few alchemists believed playing lute music to their crucibles improved the metal's harmony. Though no medieval lute player has since claimed credit for turning anything to gold. Your foot nudges. It's a small pile of broken glass remnants of an earlier experiment that exploded in a flash of green flame. You recall that burnt crucible near the entrance, now looking positively tame by comparison. Light joke number 2. OSHA would have had a field day here, though banding medieval scholars for safety goggles probably wasn't in the Abbey budget above. Wooden beams sag under the weight of soot from centuries of fires kindled to scorch ores. You glance up through a sliver of moonlight, peeking between planks. The silence feels alive, as if the lab itself remembers every failed formula and every triumphant shimmer of semi-precious alloy. A feeling crawls up your spine. These tools, once lifeless, pulsed with ambition. They witnessed late-night mixings of quicklime and antimony, desperate attempts to purify philosophical mercury, and the endless quest to distill hidden virtues. From common matter, the monks engineered bellows carved from goat hide, fed by squeaky leather valves that grumbled like tired donkeys. You can almost hear the rhythmic sighs as air pumped into the crucible stoked flames to fantastical temperatures. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some alchemists claimed the best bellows were made from bat skins, supposedly imbuing the fire with nocturnal potency, though no bat farm records survive. You step back to study a battered copper basin filled with a thick slurry of lead oxide and vinegar. According to a faded note in Latin, it's intended to dissolve base impurities before spirits of gold could emerge. Mainstream fact: by the 13th century, lead and vinegar mixtures were standard in European attempts at transmutation. Beneath the basin, charcoal specks dance in the flickering light, lending color and texture to what looks for all the world like a toxic mud pie. A stray breeze rattles a loose iron grate in the far corner. You half expect a whisper or a ghostly chant, but it's only the wind slipping into the stonework. Still, your pulse quickens. In one alcove, you spy an oak chest sealed with a pentangle, rumored to contain a distillation of phosphorus that glowed in the dark, eerie fringed tail. Since true phosphorus didn't appear in labs until centuries later, historians still argue whether alchemists actually captured such supernatural glow or simply used luminous powders. Made from decaying bones, you turn to the workbench, scarred with scorch marks and chemical stains that no amount of scrubbing could erase. Mortar carved from marble sit beside pestles pitted by centuries of hard use. You can almost feel the hands that ground up cinnabar, mercury sulfide. Hoping to access its female essence and alchemical metaphor for receptivity, scholars debate if these gender descriptions were metaphorical or believed literally. Your senses buzz with the layered aroma of sulfur, scorched leather, and wet stone. A single droplet of acid hisses as it hits a metal vial, a sound as startling as a cat's yowl in an empty church. Light joke number 3. At least here, you don't have to worry about spilled coffee ruining your keyboard. You crouch to examine the faint blueprint etched into the cold flora circle, intersected by squares and glyphs. A ritual space where crucibles were placed at precise angles for cosmic alignment. As you rise, brushing dust from your trousers, you realize this lab was meant to be more than a workshop. It was a sanctum where matter and spirit collided. Hidden beneath chapel shadows, it offered a sanctuary for experimentation, for chasing both divine vision and earthly profit. You wonder if any of the monks paused between distillations to question their work's morality, or if they were swept away by the lure of gold's shimmering promise. Regardless, you step back through the archway into the silent cloister above, carrying with you the echo of hisses, sparks, and medieval ambitions steeped in stone and flame. You step into the main laboratory once more, heart thudding as cold air drifts from the vaulted ceiling. A single lantern swings overhead, casting fickle circles of light on the stone floor. Ahead, a robed alchemist stands before a broad wooden table. Its surface is littered with metal ingots, powdered minerals, and scattered parchments inscribed with jagged script. These are the cryptic recipes for transmutation, the sacred formulas promising to turn base lead into gleaming gold. You lean in, tracing the swirl of symbols with your fingertip, half expecting them to pulse like neon signs. The first recipe calls for lead, sourced from church bells heavy. resonant metal believed to carry spiritual weight. Historians still argue whether alchemists truly believed the sanctified origins of the metal would facilitate divine transmutation, or if it was simply abundant and free for the plundering. You watch the monk tap gently on a small ingot, as though coaxing a secret resonance. Each tap echoes through the lab like a distant hymn. Vibrating under your feet, beside the ingot, lies a small pile of saltpeter, its crystalline grains glinting like tiny stars. The recipe dictates grinding the saltpeter with lead in a marble mortar until the mixture resembles pale ochre dust. You pick up the mortared surface, cold and pitted from centuries of use, and inhale the faint smell of earth and dust. This is mainstream alchemical practice. By the 14th century, combining saltpeter and lead was a standard step in chrysopoeia techniques. Believed to purify the lead's essence, the monk adds a few drops of distilled vinegar, collected from local wine lees, the liquid sizzling as it meets the powder. You feel the hiss on your cheek like espresso, hitting a hot panade wonder, if medieval. Baristas dreamed of foam art. Light joke number 1. If only they'd invented latte art. Those monks might have added unicorn horns to their menus. Next, you see a small phial of quicksilver, mercury glimmering in the lantern's glow. The recipe calls for the swift serpent of nature, a nod to Mercury's liquid agility. You pour it, drop by drop, into the mortar, watching as the metal beads fuse with the dusty paste. This mixing of solid and liquid metals exemplifies the dualistic philosophy alchemists embraced: solidity and fluidity, body and soul, matter and spirit. Scholars debate whether these dualities were practical observations or mystical metaphors, and some suggest the entire process was more theater than science. Historians still argue whether the physical mixing truly promised transmutation or whether it was purely symbolic ritual. A gentle hum vibrates in your ears as the monk stokes the small brazier beneath the mortar, using bellows fashioned from goat hide. You remember the squeaky valves from the last chamber today. The goat hide bellows hiss like contented sheep. Quirky tidbit: some alchemists preferred bat hide bellows at midnight, claiming the creature's nocturnal essence amplified the fire's potency, though no bat has ever confirmed such magical combustion. The paste shimmers as it heats, turning from pastel yellow to molten red. You watch rivulets of metallic muck crawl across the surface, bubbling like a miniature lava flow. The scent shifts sharply to burnt honey and ozone. Holding your breath, you realize the experiment hinges on precise timing. Heat too long, and you burn the mixture into worthless slag. Heat too little, and the lead retains its base character. Mainstream fact: medieval Athenors could sustain temperatures over 800 degrees Celsius for days, enough to smelt most European metals. As the crucible warms, the monk consults an open manuscript, propped against a stone pillar. The page is filled with arcane diagrams, circles intersecting squares, overlaid with planetary symbols. Saturn looms large, its glyph drawn in lead-colored ink. According to tradition, Saturn, lord of lead, must align at dawn with the moon for the final distillation to succeed. You peer at the diagram, imagining planets wheeling overhead, as if cosmic choreography determined whether your pocket turned to heavy metal or heavy gold. Light joke number 2. They'd probably have scheduled this like a Starbucks reopening. Come back at 5:32 a.m. when the moon and Saturn high five. You smell something acrid as the crucible's rim glows dull orange. The monk lifts it with iron tongs and tips the molten mass into a shallow casting trough. The metal flows like quicksilver, pooling into a small ingot. Your breath catches you anticipate gold's brilliance, but the lump cools to matte gray. Still lead, still lead. Disappointment ripples through the chamber. You remember that burnt crucible near the entrance? now looking dignified by comparison, unfazed. The monk returns to the recipe. Next step, the powder of projection, a rumored catalyst drawn from the burned bones of a crow. You wrinkle your nose, as the notion of crow bones cracking under heat seems macabre. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some alchemists insisted that the bones of blackbirds worked better at dawn because their song carried solar energy. No one's verified if any blackbird has consented to these experiments. You watch as a few grains of bone ash dust the ingot in the trough. The parchment instructs to recite a litanian invocation of Hermes Trismegistus while sealing the crucible. In clay, the monk murmurs the words in a rhythmic cadence, drawing the clay into a tight cocoon. You think of ancient deities and cosmic tricksters, and the weight of centuries pressing down in that small room. Every whisper seems amplified by stone, so the cloister itself remembers the triumphs and disasters of past attempts. Once sealed, the clay-encased crucible goes back into the fire. Hours will pass. You settle onto a bench, letting your mind wander. You recall how some alchemists used antimony, tin, or even crocodile dung as ingredients ridiculous by modern standards, yet earnest to those who believed nature's secrets lay hidden in every substance. Remember that odd vial of mandrake root from your first tour? That too was a fringe experiment, a hope that botanical essence could influence the heart of metal. While you wait, you sip cool water from a leather flask. Thank goodness they hadn't tried vinegar here, or you might have ended up with medieval mouthwash. Light joke number 3. No one wants breath that smells like a sulfur candle. Hours pass in near silence. The lantern guttered, and the furnace's glow dims to embers. The monk pulls the crucible from the fire, brushes away the clay, and lifts the ingot. You lean forward, breath caught between anticipation and dread. The metal glints faintly in. The lanterns flame just a whisper of gold at the edges. Close, but not quite. You feel the alchemist's frustration like a physical ache. That ache born of countless failed projections and burned manuscripts. Yet the monk smiles, wiping soot from the ingot with a rag. Progress, he says. Voice quiet but hopeful. Mainstream. Fact, by the late Middle Ages, many practitioners regarded partial success producing a golden Shinaz proof of concept. Even if pure gold remained elusive, you nod, sharing a moment of triumph in near failure. You stand, stretching taut muscles you didn't know you had. The night has deepened, and outside, the church bells toll an ironic reminder that no amount of alchemical labor can silence time. You glance at the parchment, now stained and smudged beyond legibility. That codex, once promising infinite wealth, now looks like an indecipherable scribble pad. Yet in every smudge lies the alchemist's tenacity, the unwavering belief that, with the right mixture, the universe might yield its shining secret as you leave the table. You brush past crucibles and tripods once more. The lab seems to exhale a living thing that has witnessed folly, obsession, and fleeting hope. You step back into the corridor, carrying the memory of heat and hushed chance, of cryptic recipes that straddled science and sorcery. The quest for transmutation has left its mark on you, a mixture of wonder, skepticism, and a touch of reverence for those who dared to dream in flame and lead. You slip back into the scriptorium, the scent of parchment and beeswax greeting you like an old friend. By lantern light, you settle at a long oak desk, scarred with ink blots and scorch marks, echoes of past experiments where documents doubled as spilkatures. Your fingertips brush a vellum sheet embellished with a swirling drawing of the philosopher's stone, a deep red, jewel-like orb said to perfect both metals and the soul. It pulses in your vision, promising unlimited gold and even eternal life. You thought the last ingot's faint sheen was impressive? But this mythical catalyst is the true holy grail of alchemy, historically. Alchemists across medieval Europe regarded the stone as the pinnacle of their craft by the 13th century, often describing it as a perfected form of mercury, known as the red elixir. Mainstream fact. You lean in as the page's Latin inscription whispers a recipe. Distill spirit of wine with purified mercury for 7 successive days, each under a different planetary hour. Historians still argue whether these planetary alignments were practical laboratory instructions or symbolic gestures toward cosmic harmony. The candle's flame dances across your vision as you imagine Saturn and Jupiter aligning overhead, their astral bodies lending energy to your crucibles. A drop of wax flutters from the candle onto your sleeve, and you lightly snort awake from cosmic reverie. Light joke number 1. If only you could order astrological timing on Amazon Prime next day delivery for Saturn's nod. You wipe it off, careful not to smudge the ink. Each smudge risks losing centuries of whispered secrets. Your gaze drifts to a small crystal vial set aside. Inside, a powder glitters like crushed garnet. Fringe lore claimed that the powder was created by grinding the horns of a mountain goat sacrificed at dawn. Under the rising Aries moon, a fringe tidbit, some insisted the stone itself wept tears of ruby red dew on solstices mornings, tears that could resurrect wilted flowers and soften the hardest lead. You cradle the vial between thumb and forefinger, the glass cool and smooth. As a dropped dewdrop, you close your eyes and picture a medieval workshop, coals smoldering, bellows huffing, copper and glass forged into intimate partnership. Outside, night birds trill a nocturnal chorusane eerie soundtrack to your obsession. You remember how the mandrake route from section 2 shrieked in fringe myth? Now, the stone seems poised to reveal its own voice. A whispered voice interrupts. Your thoughts, Brother Bede, the monastery's senior alchemist, shuffles over and peers at your work. He taps the vellum, eyes shining with barely concealed fervor. Behold, the opus magnum, he breathes, as if naming a newborn child. You feel the weight of his anticipation. Some narratives claim that reaching stage 1 of the great work granted a glimpse of angelic light. Historians still argue whether these visions were true mystical experiences or fever dreams induced by prolonged sensory exposure. Light joke number 2. Maybe they just needed a stronger coffee substitute here. Try my distilled demon's brew. Brother Bede opens a leather-bound codex, his fingers brittle yet steady. He flips to a page decorated with geometric figures overlaid on a human silhouette, the microcosm reflecting the macrocosm. The stone wasn't merely a lab reagent, okay? It was a cosmic key, unlocking unity between human and divine. You trace the figure's heart point, imagining the stone glowing within, an inner sanctuary of incandescent energy. You rise and follow Brother Bede down a narrow corridor lined with arched windows, okay? Moonlight seeps through, turning dust motes into shimmering sprites. He leads you to a secluded alcove where 2 flasks stand side by side, one brimming with a black syrup, the other with a thick crimson liquid. The Negredo and Rubetto, he whispers. The first is putrefaction, the dark stage where matter decays to reveal hidden potential. The second is the stage of reddening, the birth of the stone's life force. He nods toward a small furnace, its fire cooled to coals. Tonight, you will witness the transition from fakite to fiery promise. You settle on a wooden bench beside him, drawing your cloak tighter against the cool stone. He places the black syrup in a clay crucible and seals it with wax, embossed by a pentacola protective charm meant to ward off prying spirits. His hand trembles slightly, and you catch a whiff of sulfur as he strikes a flint. The coals glow, and the crucible's surface darkens, as if breathing. You wonder if the stone's essence is already stirring within, yearning to be born. The air grows thick, a peculiar pressure pressing against your temples. You feel your pulse synchronize with the furnace's rhythm, a slow inhale through the rafters, an exhale through smoldering embers. Light joke number 3. You practically expect a medieval heartbeat monitor to start ticking. The crackle of burning wax and the thunk of charcoal clink together in a lullaby of chemical romance. Minutes stretch like hours, then bend impossibly. The black syrup darkens further, bubbling like primordial tar. Brother Bede mutters a litany in a language you can barely place, Latin peppered with a few Arabic terms from Jabir's influence. You recall that 8th century alchemists believed Arabic held intrinsic power over matter. Historians still argue whether they borrowed technical terms purely for their precision or to cloak their work in an exotic mystique as the black crucible kisses the coals. The vesica-shaped lid begins to glow faint red at the seams. You lean in to close smoke curls across your eyelashes, a smoky veil between you and revelation. The red glow intensifies, flooding the small chamber with a warm, sanguine light. You feel a rush of elation, as though witnessing the dawn of creation. Then, a sudden hisswack seal bursts, spewing sparks like drunken fireflies. You duck, heart hammering against your ribs. When you look back, the crucible lies split open. A small, gleaming bead rests in the shattered waxen orb. No. Larger than a cherry pit, shimmering with inner fire. Your breath stops. Could this be the stone's first whispered breath? If you catch Brother Bede's gaze, his eyes wet, unblinkingly fixed on the bead. He reaches for a pair of tongs, hesitant, as if touching a newborn flame. You hold your breath. The bead pulses once, twice like a heartbeat. The world narrows to that tiny orb, nestling in ash and wax. It could be garnet dust or a trick of the lantern's reflection, but it shines with the promise of all that alchemists have longed for: gold, healing, perfection. Yet you can't shake the thought that it might also be a cruel jest, a transient shimmer destined to fade. Behind you, the abbey walls seem to lean in, listening. The hush is absolute. You wonder if every monk in the cloister is chasing the same dream, the same lure of perfection. The idea that a mere catalyst could transform, elevate, and redeem both metal and soul. What a seductive lie. Historians still argue whether the true alchemical quest was chemical at all or a spiritual allegory for inner refinement. You clear your throat and finally speak. Voice hushed, but certain. We must test it. Brother Bede nods, as though he's been waiting all his life to hear those words. You steady yourself, ready to cradle that fragile hope between metal tongs. To risk everything for a chance at forging the impossible. You slip back into the cool corridor, still cradling that fragile bead of rubedo from Brother Bede's crucible, its warm glow fading in the moonlit hush. Your footsteps echo softly against cold stone, and a deep sense of camaraderie stirs almost, as if the monastery itself is nodding in approval of your midnight rendezvous. Up ahead, an unmarked door stands slightly ajar, offering a whispered invitation to a world of hidden whispers and coded promises. The air here carries the musk of damp moss and old parchment. And you can't shake the feeling that behind this door lies the beating heart of alchemical secrecy. Inside, you find a small chamber lit by a single iron brazier, its embers glowing faintly. Around its perimeter, cloaked figures huddle in semi-darkness, their faces obscured by cowls embroidered with arcane glyphs. The stylized Ouroboros, ancient snake devouring its tail end, the crescent moon sigil shared among clandestine alchemical fraternities. These secret brotherhoods first coalesced in the late 12th century, often under the guise of monastic orders. pooling resources and manuscripts to advance chrysopoeia, alchemical medicine, and metaphysical inquiry. Historians still argue whether such organized societies truly existed this early or if they were romantic inventions of later centuries. A low murmur fills the room as one figure slides a sheaf of vellum across a rough wooden table. The parchment is scored with overlapping circles, triangles, and letters in Greek, Latin, and Arabic, an interweaving of traditions that hints at a cross-cultural network. You lean in, your fingers tingling as you trace an inscription. Solve et coagula. Dissolve and coagulate. The very maxim of alchemy. A whispered rumor claims that some scribes used invisible ink made from citrus juice, only to be revealed by gentle heat from candlelight. Quirky tidbit. One group reportedly employed crushed fireflies to illuminate hidden letters, their bioluminescence revealing secret recipes in the pitch black. The chamber's hush is broken by a hooded speaker, reciting a litany in clipped syllables. Each word corresponds to a planet: Sol, Luna, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn. A coded sequence unfolds, guiding initiates through a ritual where alchemical operations mirror celestial cycles. As you memorize the cadence, you recognize echoes of texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus and fragments of the Emerald Tablet. Light joke number 1. You half expect a medieval group chat notification, "You up for Electrum tonight? If only monks had smartphones." Next, a second. Alchemist uncovers a narrow wooden box sealed with a leaden pentacle. Inside lies a set of small clay tablets, each etched with runes that shimmer under the brazier's glow. You pick up one tablet, its surface rough against your palm. The runes form a puzzle. The points of a 7-pointed star align with letters that spell out the recipe for the sacred sulfur. To decode it, you must rotate the tablet precisely to the hour of Saturn's zenith. Historians still argue whether these star tables were practical lab tools or mystical diagrams for contemplative meditation. You cradle the bead of red glass in one hand, and the clay tablet in the other, feeling like you're holding two halves of a cosmic handshake. You tuck both into your robes, careful not to drop a single fragment. Beside you, a monk offers a quick draft of almond-infused spiced wine to sharpen your mind. The liquid tastes like toasted nuts and honey, yet lingers, with a hint of bitter Alozan early herbal brew believed to quicken intellectual faculties. Mainstream fact: alchemical fraternities often shared medicinal tinctures alongside metal transmutation recipes, viewing both as twin paths to perfecting body and spirit. A hush falls again as a third speaker steps forward, brandishing a slender rod of polished copper inscribed with hieroglyphs. The rod is called the Pilgrim's Staff, said to guide one safely through each stage of the great work. He taps it thrice on the stone floor. Each thud resonates like a distant bell, establishing the pace of an egalitarian chain of command. Leadership no, single master, but rotating roles to preserve secrecy. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some orders used a voting system in which each member tossed a pebble into a chalice to signify approval, essentially a medieval poll on whether to proceed with a risky experiment. You lean close to the braided circle that forms the heart of this society, sometimes called the Fratress, Atonia in whispered tales, and you realize their loyalty is less to gold than to knowledge itself. They exchange fragments of codices, diagrams, and gnomic verses, each member devoting years to memorizing critical passages before passing them on. Failure to preserve secrecy risked excommunication, confiscation of materials, or worse, public disgrace. Light joke number 2. Imagine getting banned from the Brotherhood for posting alchemical spoilers on a parchment billboard as the discussion unfolds. If you recall the burnt crucible and shattered glass from earlier experiments in Section 2, and the faint golden sheen of the lead ingot from section 3. You understand now that the true alchemist's quest was as much about coded collaboration as about chemical acumen. These midnight meetings weren't merely showmanship. There were lifelines for isolated practitioners, ensuring that precious manuscripts survived pirate raids, inquisitorial searches, and simple manuscript rot. A soft breeze drifts through a narrow slit in the wall, carrying with it the scent of jasmine and wet earth. Someone murmurs that the next gathering will occur beneath an old yew tree outside the cloister. Walls plants alchemists revered as guardians of hidden wisdom. Fringe lore suggests that yew-born spores whispered the secrets of phosphorus, too. Those who slept beneath its boughs, no contemporary scholar has confirmed whether any initiate actually dreamed the final step of chrysopoeia. You shift slightly, feeling the weight of your discoveries pressing against your ribs. Your mind buzzes with the thrill of code breaking, the hush of shared knowledge beneath stone arches, and the pulse of ancient ambition. Scholars debate whether this fraternal structure was a precursor of modern scientific academies, or simply a peripheral curiosity of monastic life. Historians still argue whether these gatherings shaped the Renaissance's intellectual awakenings or remained confined to esoteric corners, invisible until rediscovered centuries later. The braziers. Embers dim, and you realize you've been here for hours, breathing the same air as countless initiates before you. Your fingers trace one last symbol on the clay tablet, committing its shape to memory. You slip it back into its box, sealing the lid with a whispered prayer. The cowl of the speaker turns toward you, eyes gleaming in the ember light. He inclines, his head in silent acknowledgement, an unspoken welcome into the fold. You stand and step into the corridor once more, the weight of secrecy settling comfortably in your chest. The bead in your pocket warms your thigh, a talisman of what you've witnessed. As you emerge into the night's gentle chill, you realize the bond you share with these alchemists is more precious than any lump of base metal you carry with you. Their codes, their whispered symbols, and the knowledge that even in the darkest crypts, the pursuit of transformation burned bright. You step down a narrow spiral staircase into a low-ceilinged chamber where the air tastes faintly metallic. Rows of wooden crates line the walls, each packed with small clay jars sealed in pitch. A single lamp flickers against the dark, illuminating. The jar's contents, beads of quicksilver, liquid silver pooling like mercury tides under glass. You feel its pulp promising cosmic power, secret elixirs. Gold itself yet warning of hidden peril beyond any medieval infirmary. The hushed glow reveals a bench strewn with flasks, pestles, and old leather gloves stained by past experiments. A faint hiss accompanies each careful pour, as if the mercury resists containment. A gaunt figure in patched robes kneels before the bench, gently tipping a flask to drip mercury into a small crucible. By the 15th century, alchemists regarded mercury as one of the three fundamental principles, sulfur representing combustibility, salt embodying solidity, and mercury bridging the fluid and the fixed. You watch the silvery droplets unite like liquid moonlight, coalescing into a single pulsating bead. Historians still argue whether medieval practitioners considered mercury primarily a physical ingredient or a spiritual medium, linking earth and sky. You lean forward, breath-catching as the monk places the crucible on a charcoal brazier. The bellows groan, sending sparks catalyzed by powdered sulfur swirling around your ankles. Sudden cough escapes you as a faint cloud of vapor rises. Modern aside, you imagine OSHA inspectors swooning at the thought of unventilated vapors and no safety goggles. Light joke number 1. At least the medieval world hadn't yet banned workplace helmet hair. On a nearby shelf, you notice an oblong jar labeled in spidery Latin, Mercurius Philosophorum, Fringe lore claimed this was mercury gathered from the skulls of executed alchemists, imbuing it with their lingering ambition. You raise an eyebrow, fringe tidbit number 1, but you can't deny the thrill of handling such forbidden residue. The furnace's glow intensifies, casting the monk's face in sallow brightness. He taps the crucible with a small rod, and a high-pitched ping rings out, startling nearby bats that flutter against the stone vault. You remember the mandrake? Root screeching in section 2, but this metallic sizzle feels far more ominous. The moonlight glints off the mercury's surface, and for a moment you imagine it alive, writhing like a silver serpent. A delicate glass condenser coils overhead, ready to capture distilled mercury vapors. You recall how Andrea Libavius, the Protestant alchemist of the early 1600s, warned of mercury's insidious corruption of mind and body, long before scientists mapped heavy metal poisoning. Mainstream fact: chronic mercury inhalation can lead to tremors, memory loss, and mood swings, symptoms ominously similar to medieval melancholia. Historians still argue whether many alchemists' reported mystical visions were side effects of mercury encephalopathy. Your pulse quickens as the monk carefully shakes powdered cinnabar into the flaming crucible. The red sulfide sizzles, and vapor curls upward in ghostly tendrils. The air grows thick. You feel a weight behind your eyes. A swirl of dizzying euphoria tugs at your thoughts before a wave of nausea crashes in. You grip the edge of the bench, mouth tasting of ash and regret. Light joke number 2. You'd trade all the golden drachmas in the abbey for a bar of modern-day chewing gum right about now. Leaning closer, you spy a battered manuscript hidden beneath a pile of charcoal, its spine cracked. It promises Mercury's secret fourth phase, where the metal transforms into spiritus vitae, a life-giving essence. Fringe tidbit number 2. Some texts insisted that mercury distilled at dawn on Easter morning would purge the body of sin, though no documented case of both surviving has ever surfaced. The monk pauses the heating, letting the crucible cool. He dons cracked leather gloves. Pity there's no nitrile alternative, and gently lifts the bead that formed at the bottom. It glows faintly, as though still alive. Can almost hear a whisper of promise and pain. The surface bears fine cracks radiating outward, like a web of destiny. A thin film of greasy residue clings to the crucible's Riemann unholy perfume of sulfur and metal. A sudden tremor shakes the bench as someone above hammers on the stone floor. Instructors of the secret fraternities often insisted trials proceed in absolute solitude. Interruptions meant failure or worse, accusations of sorcery. You swallow, recalling whispered rumors of alchemists tried before ecclesiastical courts. Their mercury-laced experiments construed as diabolical. Historians still argue whether ruthless inquisitors targeted alchemists for religious reasons, or merely coveted their precious materials. The monk offers you a small sample drop on a silver plate. It ripples under the lamp's glow, capturing every flicker. You lift the plate closer, spotting a rainbow sheen that dances across the surface. The sight is hypnotic, like oil on water magnified 20-fold. You wonder how many predecessors stared into the same flare, believing they glimpsed the very face of God. Your head spins, you settle onto a low stool. A jar containing crushed firefly lumens sits nearby, a record of that fringe fraternity's earlier secret codes. You chuckle softly, despite the whirl of mercury haze. Light joke number 3. Some alchemists swore by firefly tears to charge mercury with nocturnal energy, though it probably just made everything feel more psychedelic. You rub your temples and recall the bead of rubedo you carried from section 4, fragile proof of the stone's promise. This shimmering mercury bead, by contrast, speaks of danger and potency. You realize alchemists risked their bodies for every drop of liquid silver, chasing ephemeral breakthroughs while courting slow death. The monk gathers the mercury and seals it in a lead-lined phial, labeling it with a pentagram for safekeeping. He exhales a shaky laugh. Power, he says softly, always exacts a price. If you feel the truth of that in your bones, slip the phial into your robes alongside the clay tablet and red bead, your pockets now heavy with both promise and poison. As you ascend the stairs back toward the cloister, your vision clears in the cooler air. You glance behind, seeing the lab's flickering light through a narrow archway. You imagine the mercury's sheen taunting in the dark, a mirror of human ambition, brilliant, fluid, and undeniably toxic. You climb a narrow ladder to a turret chamber crowned by a slated roof, where moonlight spills onto an octagonal floor strewn with vellum star charts. A bronze astrolabe hangs from a timber beam, swaying gently as if caught in an unseen breath. You step forward, boots sounding muted on wooden planks, and feel the hush settle like soft velvet. This is the alchemist's celestial workshop, where each concoction hinges on cosmic choreography, and the heavens themselves dictate the dance. A furnace and flask. At the center, an oaken table is draped with deep blue cloth spattered by silver constellations. Scattered across it are parchment wheels painted with zodiac signs and planetary glyphs. Sol's golden disk, Luna's silver crescent, fiery Mars, bleeding red. You reach out and trace the path of Jupiter, featherlight fingers following lines. That snake toward the symbol for sulfur. By the 14th century, alchemists routinely timed their operations by planetary hours, an inherited practice from Arabic scholars believed to align terrestrial matter with celestial order. Historians still argue whether these alignments actually influenced chemical reactions or functioned chiefly as mnemonic devices for complex recipes. Slender monk in midnight blue robes kneels by a small brazier in the corner, adjusting a bronze ring upon a tripod. The ring is etched with zodiacal degrees. At its center sits a crucible filled with quicklime and lead shavings. Tonight, he awaits the exact hour of Mercury, the planet of transformation, whose swift orbit is thought to infuse the mixture with its mercurial essence. You watch as he inclines his head to a battered sundial perched by a narrow window, whispering, an invocation to Hermes Trismegistus, its fringe tidbit. Some alchemists swore that whispering Mercury's invocation backward summoned elemental sprites to stir the crucible, though. No elemental has ever RSVP'd to medieval ritual invitations. You crouch to examine a vellum chart pinned to the far wall. Its edges are weighted by polished agate stones to prevent curling. The chart displays an astrological mandala, mapping out optimal times for the Negredo, Albedo, K and Rubedo phases of the great work. Tiny red specks of garnet dust shimmer along the line where the moon intersects with Saturn, an ominous crossing. Lord of Lead demanded somber reflection and slow distillation. Light joke number 1. You have expect a medieval horoscope reading today. Your lead ingot meets delay. Avoid urgent quests at dawn. Above you, a narrow slit window frames the night sky. You tilt your head back, watching Orion's belt flash against the abyss. You remember that crystal vial of garnetried powder from Section 4 and the odd glowing rubedo bead in your pocket, each promising both matter and magic. The stars feel closer here, as if centuries of alchemists have pressed them into the stone walls, their unfulfilled hopes frozen in the granite. Modern aside, you imagine astrophysicists in white coats rolling their eyes at astrological alchemy. Number co-star subscription required. Thank you very much. The monk slides open a small chest lined with padded velvet and retrieves a series of wooden tablets engraved with planetary hours. Each tablet is tied with sinew and sealed with wax bearing the sign of soul. He sets the first tablet beside the crucible and nods at you to consult the chart. You cross-reference the tablet's inscription, First hour of Venus in Libra, hour, for gentle fusion. You watch as he flips a lever that tips brass weights, and the furnace flame arcs higher, bathing the chamber in golden light. The mellow heat coaxes the lead shavings into a silvery puddle. You breathe deeper, smelling warm metal and the faint tang of rosemary, the herb they burned to honor Venus's fructifying power. Mainstream fact. Late medieval treatises often paired specific herbs, colors, and metals with planetary influences, combining astrology and early pharmacology into a unified craft. You sniff at the rosemary smoke and wonder if the alchemists truly believed a sprig of thyme would sweeten their elixir, or if it was simply a pleasant smoke to mask the stink of sulfur. Scholars debate whether these astrological correspondences were intended as literal impetuses for chemical change or rhetorical flourishes to elevate their practice. The circles on the mural swirl in your peripheral vision, and you feel like an extra in a cosmic play where every actor wears a lab coat and a starched cowl. A cold breeze drifts in, scattering loose parchments. One flutters across the brazier and crisps at the edge, eliciting a startled gasp from you. Light joke number 2. If medieval health and safety had a motto, it'd probably be, don't read and roast your paperwork at the same time. You steady the flap before it ignites, noting a fragment of Latin poetry tucked at the margin. As above, so below. The secrets of the sky reflect in molten flows. You recall that same maxim, etched on the clay tablet from Section 5, the universal code, binding earth and ether. The repetition feels comforting, like a lullaby of esoteric unity. The monk, eyes alight, lifts the crucible with tongs and pours the molten metal into a shallow mold. The rivulets pool in star-shaped hollows, forming little ingots that cool to a pale, silvery hue. You lean closer and notice one ingot bears a subtle sheen of iridescent bluer, glimmer of Jupiter's influence. Perhaps. Fringe tidbit number 2. Some alchemists claimed that blue-hued metal could channel celestial harmony into healing ointments. Though no medieval healer ever tested it on more than a paper cut. You hesitate to test that rumor yourself, Blue? Ointment plus medieval bandaging doesn't scream safe clinical trial. The monk consults his star chart again, rotating a brass disc to indicate the hour of Mars. He places a small glass retort atop the brazier and adds the newly cast ingot alongside a pinch of powdered cinnabar. The retort hisses and a plume of greenish vapor swirls inside, tinting the chamber like a poisonous fog. You cough softly, eyes watering. Light joke number 3. The only fog you're used to is the one that forms on bathroom mirrors after hot showers, less dramatic and less likely to poison you, as the retort's neck darkens. The monk toggles the astrolabe's fine gear, aligning its pointer with the moon's position at midnight. You watch amber droplets collect in a glass receiver, each bead a distillate blessed by Luna's cool touch. Mainstream fact, alchemists believed lunar influence purified the watery principle, yielding an albedo essence essential for the second phase of the great work. Historians still argue whether these watery distillations were early forms of aqua vita, or symbolic markers on a path towards spiritual whitening. Your mind drifts back to the syrupy Negrado mixture in Section 4, where blackness governed decay, and wonder if this lunar albedo is any less strange than crushing goat horns or distilling firefly lumens. You flex your fingers, remembering the weight of the rubedo bead, the sting of mercury vapors, the hiss of mandrake rootich experiment, a note in an alchemical symphony conducted under starlight. The monk lifts another tablet. This one marked with Saul's blazing sun, and moves toward a separate hearth. He places a yellow-hued ingot there, the one that caught Jupiter's glow, and the flame swells with an almost sonic crackle. He murmurs an invocation to the sun, his voice low and reverent. The ingot softens, then flows like liquid gold into a shallow bowl. You catch your breath as the metal cools to a pale gold, warmer in tone than any lead alloy you've seen. It shimmers with solar promise, a fleeting echo of the philosopher's stone itself. A hush envelops the turret. Before you, place a fingertip near its surface pulled by an urge you can't explain. The metal glows softly under your skin, a reminder that matter, time, and cosmos can converge in a single moment of transformation. You think of all the times you've watched the ingots fail to shine, the crucibles shatter, the charts misalign. Yet here, under this turret's vaulted sky, you feel vice-like certainty that alchemy's magic springs from the same dust that stardust came. You step back and bow your head. The star charts seem to pulse with approval, or perhaps that's your imagination woven by exhaustion and lunar fumes. In this vaulted chamber, you've witnessed the celestial script that guided medieval alchemists, blending science, ritual, and cosmic wonder. Whether their astrological tools truly shaped matter or simply guided belief, their legacy remains written in metal and myth. You step through the grand archway into the Lord's court, where torchlight flickers on tapestries woven with gold thread, and the hush of reverence follows you like a shadow. Courtiers in velvet doublets exchange curious glances as you carry the rubedo bead in your pocket and the phial of philosopher's mercury at your hip. The hall's vaulted ceiling echoes with soft lute music, and the scent of spiced wine and roasted boar drifts in from the great table. Here, alchemy is no mere cloistered pursuit, is a spectacle commissioned by monarchs, who equate metal mastery with dynastic power. You recall the candlelit obscurity of the turret and the hush of secret fraternities under yew trees. And now, you feel that same thrill of initiation as you approach a raised dais draped in crimson velvet. At its center, a marble table bears a gilded brazier and an array of stoppered glass vessels, gifts from the crown's treasurer. By the late 14th century, European kings routinely employed court alchemists to fund wars or lavish banquets with unlimited gold. Mainstream fact. Historians still argue whether these royal patronages advanced early chemistry or merely bankrolled extravagant charlatans. A stately chamberlain strides forward, offering you a goblet of honeyed wine. Sweetness coats your tongue, reminding you of the almond spice draft from the clandestine meeting in Section 5. You sip carefully, mindful that any sudden move could send spiced wine cascading over silk doublets. Light joke number 1. At least here you don't have to mop up lead filings afterward, only spilled mead dot across from you. The king reclines on a cushioned bench, his ermine-lined cloak sweeping the stone floor. He peers at you intently, eyebrows raised in cautious expectation. With a slight bow, you place the crucible, still faintly warm from the brazier, on the marble table. Courtiers murmur as you scrape sulfur-coated lead shavings into a crystalline mortar. You grind them, recalling the mandrake roots alleged. Screams in those monastic labs of Section 2. Here, the mortar's scraped echo rings out like a drum roll, building anticipation. Next, you uncover a small phial containing the red garnet dust you found in the turret. Fringe tidbit. Some alchemists claim this powder came from the crushed horns of a unicorn, skeleton rumored to have been discovered in the king's own forests, though no zoologist has ever confirmed its origin. As you sprinkle the powder into the crucible, you catch the king's eye. His face softens, as though he believes you're about to summon mythical beasts rather than gold. You light the brazier beneath the crucible with a slender taper. The flame wavers, then leaps, sending gold sparks dancing onto the marble. You recall Brother Bede's litany to Saturn and the hushed chant for Mercury back in Section 4 and Section 6. Here, however, the chant is replaced by polite applause from the courtiers, their gloved hands clapping in time with crackling coals. Light joke number 2. Medieval applause must have wrecked countless ornate sleeves as the mixture liquefies. Its surface shifts from dull gray to phosphorescent gold flecks, an alchemical teaser that draws gasps. You stir the molten mass carefully, coaxing the tiny gold veins to merge. This moment echoes your first bath in golden hope, when the alchemist in Section 3 produced that faintly gleaming ingot. Yet now, under royal scrutiny, every shimmer counts as a promise of wealth and victory. A herald steps forward. Unfurling a parchment scroll, the king seeks to finance a new crusade and hopes your art will mint enough coin to unburden his treasury. You straighten, feeling the weight of patronage settle on your shoulders. This is no simple monk's curiosity, but a wager on your skill. Scholars debate whether such demands transformed serious inquiry into crude profiteering or truly spurred systematic experimentation. Historians still argue whether courtly commissions laid groundwork for modern laboratories or merely exploited mystic allure. You tilt the crucible and pour the molten metal into a shallow mold heralded by a small silver lizard carving a gift from the crown to magnify reptilian resilience in the metal structure. Fringe tidbit number 2. Legend claims these lizard motifs were imbued with draconic fire, channeling a beast's ferocity into coins. The metal pools like liquid sun, then solidifies into a row of pale gold ingots, each stamped with a royal crest. The hall erupts in relieved murmurs. Courtiers cluster around, their velvet sleeves brushing against your robes. A young page tries to inspect the ingots and nearly trips over a polished buckle. Light joke number 3. If only they'd invented guardrails for delicate gold, they'd have safer demonstrations. You notice the page's wide eyes and recall the youthful wonder you felt at the sight of the glowing bead in Section 4. The king's hand trembles as he lifts an ingot, pressing it to his lips. He nods gravely, offering you a vault key ring, your reward, and his binding contract. You secure the tiny ring against your heart. Thinking of all the hidden alcoves and secret laboratories you've traversed, the monastic cloisters, the subterranean crucibles, the turrets, astrolabe, even the hush of coded fraternities under moonlit yews. Now, each of those echoing corridors feels like a stepping stone to this moment beneath tapestries of gold and velvet. A court physician approaches, wielding a flask of aromatic vinegar, nod to early pharmacological practices mingled with alchemical experiments. He invites you to sample his elixir, reputed to ward off fatigue and protect the body from metal's corrupting influence. Mainstream fact: royal courts often commissioned alchemical theriac and panaceas alongside chrysopoeia, blending medicine and magic under one roof. You smile politely, though your senses ache for cleaner air than the sulfur and mercury haze you endured in Section 6. Behind you, cloaked figure slips through a side door, clutching a leather-bound repair kit of brass gears and parchment. You recognize the insignia of the secret brotherhood from Section 5's. This emissary must be conveying back-coded notes on your performance and the royal experiment's outcome. In that silent nod, you feel the dual pull of public patronage and private fraternity, a balancing act older than the abbey you first explored. You step away from the dais, the vault keys jingling at your belt. The courtiers part before you like a living river of silk and satin. The hall's torchlight shimmers across the inlaid marble floor, and for a moment, you think you glimpse the faces of past alchemists carved into the stone, ghostly observers of your success. Yet, when you blink, they're gone, replaced by carved lions and griffins guarding the throne. You pass beneath a grand chandelier dripping with crystals that catch, refract torchlight like fractured stars. You recall the mandrake roots? Shriek, the mercury's hiss, the astrolabe's soft click, and now the stilled awe of courtiers seduced by alchemical promise. You slip out through a private gallery, footsteps silent on velvet runners, carrying with you the monarch's favor and the weight of unspoken expectations. Outside, the cool night air greets you like a cleansing tide. You let the vault keys slip into your pocket alongside the rubetto bead and hidden clay tablet. As you make your way toward the stables, you realize courtly patronage has elevated alchemy from smoky cloisters to gilded halls, and with it, then, stakes have grown immeasurably. Whether monarchs truly sought knowledge or merely glittering coin, your craft has become entwined with power, ambition, and the ever-turning wheel of fortune. You slip through a hidden door off the stables and find yourself in a twilight garden, rows of herbs glimmering with dew like tiny green jewels. A stone path winds between raised beds bordered by thyme and hyssop, common enough, but your gaze locks onto a cluster of gnarled, forked roots sprouting from dark soil. Mandrake, its leaves rustle in the evening breeze, as if whispering secrets you're not quite ready to hear. You crouch, inhaling the earthy, musky scent that seems to hum beneath your nostrils, and wonder if you've stumbled into an enchanted forest or the alchemist's own private apothecary. In medieval Europe, alchemists often doubled as herbalists, incorporating plants into their recipes to balance chemical reactions and soothe the body. Mandrake was prized as an early anesthetic in pain, relief rituals, and childbirth preparations. Mainstream fact. You remember the Crown Physician's aromatic vinegar in Section 8. Here, you'll find tinctures distilled from nightshade berries, foxglove blooms, and mandrake sap, each promising a different flavor of transformation. Historians still argue whether these botanical experiments were genuine medical breakthroughs or symbolic exercises in mimicking metal's own life cycles. A low voice draws your attention to a squat figure, crouched by a wooden table laden with mortar and pestle. Sister Rowena, lay herbalist, known for her uncanny green thumb, smiles at you from beneath a cowl dusted with pollen. She lifts a mandrake root with ceremonious care, its twisted form resembling a tiny, arthritic human torso. You squirm, recalling fringe lore that the root emits a piercing shriek when uprooted, one so terrifying only a harnessed dog could dig it up safely. Quirky tidbit. Alchemists sometimes tied mandrake to a dog's collar and urged the hound to yank the root free, then rewarded the obedient animal with a chunk of cheese. It's probably the world's least glamorous treasure hunt. Rowena sets the root on a silver plate and wipes soil from its surface. You lean in, watching dark sap ooze from a cut and sparkle like ink spilled in moonlight. She murmurs an incantation blending Latin and early German, fingers tracing a spiral on the table in homage to Solanac's mythical potency. Light joke number 1. You half expect someone to ask if you want your mandrake shaken or stirred, Martinez style, though you're pretty sure raw mandrake isn't on any modern cocktail menu. With a steady hand, Rowena dices a single root segment into the mortar. The crush releases a pungent aroma somewhere between burnt coffee and sour apple. You pinch your nose, trying not to imagine the medicinal benefits of chewing this potent pulp. According to her notes, 1 drop of mandrake tincture could induce dreamy visions of pure gold, though most who tried it ended up seeing slightly tarnished ingots instead. Scholars debate whether mandrake's psychoactive properties inspired allegorical descriptions of metal transmutation, or if these visions fueled fringe quests for literal gold. Historians still argue whether the psychedelic haze of Solanaceae actually led to new chemical insights, or merely to hallucinatory ramblings. You Take out the rubedo bead and cheekily compare its warm glow to the garlic-colored saps in Rowena's vials. She exchanges a conspiratorial smile and reaches for a cluster of belladonna berries, black as midnight. The berries glisten like onyx under a shaft of moonlight. Fringe tidbit. Some believed belladonna's deadly flora, once distilled into devil's water, could awaken latent metal spirits inside crucibles, coaxing hidden virtues into matter. You resist the urge to ask whether the recipe calls for a pinch or a full goblet. Some recipes warned one extra seed could relocate your soul to the next world. Rowena tosses single berry into a silver alembic and seals the neck with wax bearing the serpent's head symbol. She places it atop a brazier fueled by olive peels, their dry crackle echoing like distant thunder. You inhale the sweet narcotic smoke curling through the latticework. Imagine a perfumer's utopia. If that perfumer specialized in highly illegal substances. Light joke number 2. At least nobody here will complain about stale office air conditioning while the alembic heats. Rowena pulls a folded vellum parchment from her belt. It's a Solanaceae spell recipe attributed to Mary the Jewess, a legendary first-century alchemist whose name few can verify but whose reputation for plant-based elixirs endures. The instructions call for moonlit distillation under a waning crescent, stirring clockwise 3 times and counterclockwise twice, each rotation invoking specific planetary influences. UI, the astrolabe's pointer tattooed on Rowena's wrist proof, she swears by celestial timing as faithfully as her mortar and pestle. A soft hiss issues from the alembic's spout, and pale vapors condense into tiny droplets collecting in a glass receiver. The liquid glows faintly violet, pulsing like a heartbeat. You lift a drop to your lip, hesitating as its aroma conjures memories of lavender sachets and decaying leaves. With a deep breath, you taste it bitter, floral, and strangely metallic. A warmth spreads behind your eyes, and for a moment, you feel weightless, as if you're floating in a pool of molten mercury. Then, the sensation ebbs, leaving you oddly clear-headed, as if both dreamer and witness. Rowena grins, noting your widened eyes. Beauty and sorrow in equal measure, she whispers. This is the soul of Solanaceae magic. You sip from your water skin to wash away the aftertaste. Grateful that medieval hygiene didn't include mandatory teeth cleaning between experiments. Light joke number 3. If only they'd invented mint toothpaste, alchemists might have had fresher breath. 4 court presentations. You stand, shivering in the cool night air, and wander toward a small alcove draped with curtains of ivy. Potted henbane and datura cast ghostly shadows on the stone. Lanterns hang from wrought iron hooks, their flames dancing like captive fireflies. You recall the mercury's hiss from Section 6 and the ruby glow of rubedo from Section 4. Here, the living green of these plants feels equally potent. You brush a velvet leaf petal, marveling that a flower can wield both poison and panacea. On a narrow shelf rests a copper basin filled with mullein flowers steeping in warm oil. Rowena explains that when rubbed into metal surfaces, this oil formed a protective patent and early corrosion inhibitor. She calls it, though others joked it was merely medieval WD-40. Mainstream fact, medieval metallurgists used herbal infusions, like mullein oil, to prevent rust on swords and tools, blending practical chemistry with botanical lore. Scholars debate whether these techniques arose from systematic observation or evolved haphazardly from superstition. You pluck a single flower and press it to your nose, inhaling its soft, hay-like fragrance. The world narrows to that scent. A reminder that alchemy's ambitions often sprouted from humble roots. As you turn to leave, Rowena presses a small satchel into your hand, filled with powdered roots and pressed petals. For your journey, she says, eyes bright in the lantern glow. May these herbs guide you where metals cannot. You step out of the walled garden and back into the moonlit path leading to the abbey's stone steps. The scents of mandrake, belladonna, and mullein cling to your cloak like ghostly whispers. You feel richer than any ingot, armed with living virtues distilled from soil and sky. As you ascend the steps, you realize that alchemy's true magic lay not only in crucibles and flames, but in the quiet wisdom of roots and petals, an organic alchemy parallel to the metallic quests you've witnessed. The night air wraps around you in velvet coolness, and you carry with you the hush of herbladen breezes, the memory of whispered spells, and the lingering promise of green transformation. You slip through a large doorway into a warm, lamplit chamber, redolent of spiced wine and drying herbs. Copper alembics and glass retorts perch on stone shelves like domestic trophies, each containing a tincture more exotic sounding than the last aqua vita that smells of fire and honey, elixir of life labeled in faded Latin, and phials of distilled gemstones glinting like fairy dust. In medieval Europe, alchemists increasingly turned their crucibles toward healing, blending their quest for gold with the desire to cure, plague, and prolong life. Mainstream fact. Historians still argue whether these early iatrochemical experiments genuinely improved health or merely extended placebo effects by several hours. You cross the rough-hewn floor, brushing the smooth lip of a brass basin filled with a milky infusion of crushed unicorn hornin, ingredient once revered for its supposed universal antidote to poison. Fringe tidbit. Some apothecaries claimed that unicorn horn, dust collected at dawn on Midsummer's Eve, would neutralize even the deadliest toxins. Though no unicorn ever filed for patent protection, the pungent minty aroma of this panacea mingles with the nutty Thames of Theriaca, famed antidote concocted from dozens of ingredients, including vipers, flesh, myrrh, and opium. Light joke number 1. If only modern pharmacies required 65 ingredients and a 5-hour distillation before they handed you a dose of ibuprofen. A sturdy oak table dominates the center of the room, its surface checkered with burn marks and acid stains. On it rests a leather-bound codex open to a page detailing the grand elixir of Babylon, attributed in scribble to Hermes Trismegistus. You lean in, tasting dust in the air, and trace instructions to distill wine with coral powder for 3 days under the waxing moon. Scholars debate whether coral possessed any genuine curative compounds or served primarily as a metaphor for the flesh of the world's hidden depths. You imagine medieval coral farms teeming with divers tethered to wooden barrels on aquatic's medieval version of Shark Week. At the far end, slender nun in emerald vestments drizzles a few drops of laudanum into a small glass cup. The liquor, dark as pomegranate molasses, steams in the cold air. Careful, she murmurs, voice soft as prayer. A single teaspoon quiets cough and conscience alike. You recall the mercury-laced vapors of Section 6 and feel a twinge of relief. At least this tincture won't make you tremble uncontrollably, though it might leave you blissfully numb. Light joke number 2. Imagine a medieval narcotic legal. Lemmy, sorry sister, you're a drop over your laudanum quota. You wander past shelves of oddities. Powdered mummy, Egyptian remedy for epilepsy. Crushed basilisk bone cures impotence, and jars of snail slime skin renewal for noble women. You pick up a vial labeled philosopher's blood, supposedly distilled from the residue of failed transmutations. A fringe colleague once insisted that mixing it with chamomile tea induced prophetic dreams of golden rain. You tip the vial and a few viscous drops slither onto your palm, leaving a sticky gold-brown smear. Historians still argue whether such Grotesque ingredients were actually used in medicine or served as cautionary legends to distinguish earnest practitioners from charlatans. The nun beckons you over to a stone sink, where fresh spring water trickles from a carved lion's head spout. On the basin's rim sits a copper spoon holding a thick mustard jello paste of crushed gentian root and honey. She explains that this philosopher's plaster was spread over wounds to draw out toxins and accelerate healing. Mainstream fact: emollient balms and poultices combining honey, resins, and botanical extracts were standard medieval remedies and often showed real antiseptic properties. You spread a dab on your finger and taste sour sweetness, far more appetizing than the cracked leather gloves you've worn all night above the sink. A faded fresco depicts a healer stirring a cauldron beneath a sunbursten image you recognize from the clay tablet in section 5. The repetition of that solar maxim feels comforting. The same cosmic principles animating gold also vitalize blood and spirit. You touch the fresco's chipped surface, half expecting it to pulse. Instead, the gentle burble of water grounds you in reality. Scholars debate whether these pictorial guides served as instructional diagrams for novices or rich allegories for inner transformation. Turning back to the table, you notice a small, heart-shaped lockbox of bleached bone. A rusted iron key dangles from its latch, an emblem of life, stolen to protect the formulas within. The nun hands you the key with a whisper, "For emergencies only." Inside lies a phial of the so-called universal water, distilled from equal parts dew collected on roses, rain from a storm under Aries, and tears of repentance shed by a penitent sinner. Fringe tidbit: rumor holds that this water could restore youth if applied beneath the tongue on All Saints, though surviving recipients always looked remarkably the same age afterward. You place the lockbox back, mindful of the hush that falls in the chamber, a reverent pause when medicine veers toward mystery. You sip a demi-cup of decoction made from willow bark and chamomile. The warmth spreads in your chest like a mild hum, soothing a throat you didn't know itched. You breathe its herbal comfort. You consider how alchemy's medical wing foreshadowed chemistry's shift from metaphysical to empirical. Historians still argue whether Paracelsus's later advocacy for iatrochemistry is truly advanced rational pharmacology or simply cloaked traditional folk remedies in scientific jargon. A sudden creak signals the arrival of the court physician you met in section 8. He strides in with a brass-mounted staff topped by a glass Orban astrological pharmacopoeia, guiding his prescriptions by zodiacal influence. You remember the turret's astrolabe from section 7 and see its reflection in the sea orb, the same celestial choreography applied to cure as to transmute. He removes a phial of rosewater tincture and adds a few drops to your cup, insisting that Venus's favor enhances the heart's humors. You raise an eyebrow, light joke number 3. Who knew that your love life depended on the same stars that turned lead into pseudo-gold? The room brightens as dawn's first rays pierce the high window, illuminating motes swirling like tiny healing spirits. The nun extinguishes the brazier, and the scent of cooling resin mingles with damp stone. You pocket several small vials gentian, plaster, philosopher's blood, and a sample of universal water, thinking that medieval first aid kits deserve a comeback trend. As you step toward the door, you pause, heart full of conflicting thoughts, the miraculous cures and the outlandish panaceas, the earnest experiments and the charlatans' smoke. You touch the curing in your pocket, the same weight you felt in section 8 when the king entrusted you with his vault's secrets. Now, your role has shifted from seeker of gold to keeper of life's next great alchemical frontier, healing. The chamber's shadows stretch behind you, as if urging you to remember that every cure carries its own risk, every elixir its hidden price. Yet as you close the door behind you, the air feels lighter, carrying the promise that alchemy's older. Gentler face may have saved as many souls as it once sought to gild. You slip into a dimly lit caravan warehouse on the outskirts of Avignon. The air heavy with the scent of saffron and damp burlap. Stacks of wooden crates creak as rats scurry beneath your boots, and lanterns hanging from low beams cast jittery shadows across dusty floors. In this hidden depot, alchemical parchments pass through silent hands like contraband spices, smuggled. Manuscripts so precious that merchants will risk quartered horses and confiscated caravans rather than surrender a single folio. You pull your cloak tighter and feel the weight of centuries of secrecy pressing against your shoulders. A lean trader with a lined face and sun-bleached hair beckons you to a shadowed corner. He taps a crate labeled Turkish figs and slides aside a false bottom to reveal bundles of vellum wrapped in oiled silk. You run your fingers over the unmarked spines, no Latin titles. Q. No gilded decoration, just plain sheepskin hiding recipes that promised gold, elixirs, and cosmic insight. By the late medieval period. Alchemical works such as Pseudo-Geber's Summa Perfectionis circulated widely through trade routes connecting Italy, Spain, and the Levant. Mainstream fact. Historians still argue whether these texts truly transmitted practical knowledge or merely fanned the flames of mystical speculation across Europe. You ease one bundle free and unfurl a large sheet decorated with flowing Arabic script. Margin notes in Gothic script tiny. Cramped letters document marginalia from multiple hands. A Spanish alchemist's quill, a German monk's shaky Latin, and an anonymous ciphered alphabet likely intended to mislead prying eyes. You recall the Secret Brotherhood's clay tablets from Section 5 and recognize the same Solve et Coagula emblem tucked into a corner here, a silent signature of shared lineage. Light joke number 1. If medieval scholars had Wi-Fi, this would be the original peer-to-peer file sharing network minus the buffering. Your lantern flickers as you trace a diagram of nested triangles labeled with planetary symbols. Under each triangle is a tiny puncture mark of evidence that this sheet sailed across borders years ago, surviving harsh desert winds and the Inquisitor's torch. You inhale the musty, earthy smell of old vellum, a scent that feels like history's own perfume. A fringe rumor claimed that some alchemists soaked their parchments in rosewater and saffron to repel damp and inquisitors, though no one can confirm if rose-scented text actually warded off heresy charges. Quirky tidbit. Others insisted that smuggled manuscripts were hidden in hollowed loaves of bread, disguised among crusty baguettes bound for lion. Still, no record of moldy codices has ever surfaced. The trader lowers his voice. The border guard at Montpellier demands an exorbitant toll for paper twice the price of a donkey. He pushes another bundle your way. Inside, you find a shorthand lexicon of alchemical symbols, a crescent moon enclosing a drop of mercury, a coiled serpent crowned by a flame. These obscure sigils functioned like medieval emojis, quick to scrawl, harder to decipher without the key. You sort through the codebook, smiling as you imagine scribes cursing under their breath when a missing dot could turn sulfur into saltpeter. Light joke number 2. They probably wished for autocorrect on their quills, though autocorrect is a recipe for unexpected transmutations of its own. You tuck the bundle into your satchel and notice a parchment strip tied to a Dowlin inquisitorial blacklist of banned alchemical works compiled by a zealous tribunal in Toulouse. Titles like Aurora of the Arts, Liber Magnum de Chrysopoeia, and Sacred Sulphur Scrolls are scrawled in angry red ink. The tribunal's agents policed every convent and workshop, confiscating manuscripts and burning them in public squares. Mainstream fact: in the early 15th century, orders from both church and crown sought to suppress what they deemed dangerous secret sciences. Mainstream fact. Historians still argue whether these bans hindered scientific progress or inadvertently fueled underground innovation. Your heart quickens as a distant shout echoes, customs officers on patrol, swords clattering against stone. The trader's eyes flash. He produces a hollowed goat horn and whispers, "They'll sniff for vellum in crates, not in goat droppings." He empties fine black dust from a small pouch into the horn. This is powdered pumice, used to erase ink. Then he pours in a few scraps of manuscript, enough to look convincingly spent. On cue, he huffs through the horn like a rustic trumpet, covering the dust and papers with a thin film of goatskin grease. Fringe tidbit number 2. Some smugglers claimed goat hormones in the horn-induced false proof of origin, though no goat was ever questioned to confirm. You watch him seal the horn with tallow and place it back among dusty tools. The two of you step toward a pillar and wait. A guard lantern swings through the warehouse entrance, then pauses, as if hesitating in the gloom. You steady your breath and pretend to examine nearby crates labeled olive oil for lamps. The guard's boots echo and then fade. Your chest loosens. You realize that smuggling these sacred texts demands not only cunning hides and false crates, but nerves of flint. Beyond the warehouse, Stone Alley leads to a watery canal where you've boarded a narrow barge bound for Marseille. Each footstep across the planks sounds like a drumbeat in your ears. You unwrap one fragile parchment, a poem in Galician Portuguese weaving metal recipes into a love story about a knight and his golden bride. You laugh softly at the absurd romance, thinking of the sober lecture on antimony from section 6. In this poem, each stanza instructs you to heat antimony with vinegar while whispering the lady's name, a ritual blending romantic yearning with metallurgical ambition. Light joke number 3. Nobody warned you that medieval chemistry could be so potacious. The barge lantern flickers, illuminating your clandestine trove. You tuck the parchment back beneath the silk and close your eyes, hearing the water's gentle slap against wooden ASMR lullaby that belies the gravity of your cargo. You recall the sulfur-laced fumes of Section 2 and the clandestine circle from Section 5. And you understand that these texts form the backbone of alchemy's hidden lineage, smuggled across mountains, deserts, and inquisitorial checkpoints. They carried not just recipes, but dreams of cosmic unity and boundless transformation. As dawn's pink fingers brush the horizon, you step onto Marseille's quay. The salty breeze tangles your hair, carrying the faint scent of saffron and pulp from the caravan warehouse. In your satchel rest centuries of encoded ambition, Arabic treatises, Latin homilies on the philosopher's stone, French love poems masking metal recipes, and a band ledger that could condemn any seeker to the pyre. You secure your satchel, feeling its reassuring bulk against your side. Each step toward the city's bustling docks feels laden with possibility and danger. Before you rejoin the world of merchants and sailors, you pause and press a hand to your satchel. You think of the trader's lined face, the goatskin horn, the rats-cuddled corners of that warehouse, and the trembling guard who never noticed the missing parchment. You imagine future seekers decoding these texts by candlelight, tracing symbols that will guide them through crucibles and astral chambers alike. Historians still argue whether these clandestine networks were the true conduits of scientific revolution or merely sideshows of mystic distraction. You turn toward the rising sun, the city's spires glinting in morning light. In the distance, a church bell tolls an echo of monastic hours and sacred rituals you've witnessed in Section 1. Your fingers brush the vellum in your satchel, live with hidden inks and whispered promises. As you melt into the crowd, you carry with you the weight and wonder of smuggled manuscripts, keys that unlock both metal and mind. Up bridging borders and centuries in a single parchment fold. You emerge from the coastal bustle of Marseille into a narrow alley where dawn's light barely trickles in. The air smells of salt and soot, but beneath that is something sharper: fear. Posters flutter on rough-hewn walls, each emblazoned with stern-faced judges declaring that alchemists consort with demons, can invoke unholy flames, and twist God's creation for their own profit. You crumple a pinned paper and stuff it in your satchel, alongside the fragile parchments you smuggled in. Section 11. Your heart thumps. You've heard tales of tribunals that brand alchemy a dark art, heresy punishable by fire. Historians still argue whether these inquisitions targeted genuine threats or merely scapegoated misunderstood seekers for political gain. You slip past. A cluster of ragged onlookers gathered near a wooden scaffold. Two hooded figures in clerical robes pace beneath an iron cage suspended by chains. Inside, the cage swings a beaten crucible, once said to hold liquid gold, now presented as evidence of sorcery. A judge in black velvet reads aloud the charges. Transmutation of metals is an affront to divine order. The accused have employed demons' summoning rites to forge counterfeit coin and corrupt souls. You remember the golden ingots you cast under royal patronage in Section 8. Suddenly empathize with the men whose ambitions outpaced their anonymity. Mainstream fact by the mid-15th century. European inquisitors often conflated alchemical practice with witchcraft, accusing practitioners of pacts with devils to harness fire and spirit priors for illicit ends. You shuffle closer, cringing as the judge warns that anyone caught transcribing alchemical recipes faces excommunication and confiscation of goods. A thin line pulses between scientific inquiry and condemned sorcery. And you sense every step you've taken through monasteries and courts might now be judged as damning evidence. A young scribe stands nearby, quill in hand, copying the proceedings onto crumpled parchment. Sweat trickles down his temple as he pauses, ink-stained fingers trembling. Light joke number 1. At least he won't have to worry about spilled coffee. Ink is more permanent, after all. He glances at you, fear and curiosity warring in his eyes. You nod, silently urging him to preserve truth in those brittle sheets. Inquisitorial edicts frequently survived only because scribes risked their necks to record them. On the scaffold, two accused alchemists kneel beneath the cage. Their robes are singed, faces gaunt. One, a once respected apothecary, trembles as he declares his innocence. I sought only to cure plague-ridden homes, not to conjure demons. The other, a hermit scholar, clutches a leather-bound grimoire. They claim they discovered homunculite artificial humans animated by secret formulae and used them as laboratory assistants. Fringe tidbit. Rumor holds that some tribunals displayed dummies of homunculi in town squares to terrify curious apprentices, though no credible witness ever met a living homunculus. You swallow hard. The judge tightens his robes and points to a brazier crackling with blanched bones. Behold the remains of sacrilegious mixtures, dragon's blood, phoenix ash, and the foulest ingredients stolen from God's creation. You catch a whiff of burning resin mixed with bone, an odor that evokes Section 11's powdered mummy. The crowd gasps. Mothers pull their children back as if those powders might infect them. Light joke number 2. If only trial organizers had provided earplugs and respirators. A burly inquisitor strides forward, brandishing a length of iron chain. Cantor face the hour of fire, he warns, voice echoing off limestone walls. Carrie's knees buckle. He opens his mouth to speak, but a convulsion shakes his frame. Mercury tremors. You realize, from those fateful trials you witnessed in Section 6, his hands curl inwards as he swears fealty to the church. tears streaking his sooty cheeks. The hermit scholar, by contrast, stares unmoving at the cage, lips forming silent prayers. You force your feet to move. There's a doorway half hidden by crates of saltpeter, fitting irony. You slip inside, lantern drawn, and find yourself in a cramped antechamber lit by a single candle. The walls are plastered with trial transcripts and warnings. Forgeries found in crucibles will be delivered to the pyre without respite. You tighten your cloak, willing your stolen manuscripts to remain hidden beneath layers of dust and cloth in the corner. A wooden bench is bolted to the floor. On it lies a stack of notebooks, confessions extracted from condemned alchemists. You peek at one battered volume and read, "I invoked Beelzebub to quicken the flame. My ingots shone with unnatural light. Forgive me, Father." You wonder? How many confessions sprang from genuine guilt and how many were extorted under threat of death? Scholars debate whether such confessions reveal true practices or are the tortured mutterings of victims desperate to survive. Historians still argue whether tribunal records reflect real alchemical techniques or lurid fantasies. Planted by interrogators, you step past a stained wooden table littered with broken glass and empty flasks, the remnants of evidence. You've just escaped. A thin haze of sulfur lingers, hugging the corners like a sleeping cat. Light joke number 3. If medieval judges had bothered to clean crime scenes, maybe fewer innocents would have been blamed for demon summoning. No. You tuck your satchel beneath the bench and press your back against the wall. Your breath echoes in the hollow cavity of old stone. Your mind races through every crucible you've seen, every coded tablet you've decoded. You think of the clandestine fraternity in Section 5 swapping clay tablets under yew trees to avoid inquisitors' gazes. You imagine their secret meetings, hushed voices sharing remedies and transmutation secrets. Even as the world outside turned alchemy into an act of heresy. Their notebooks, their glyphs. Their solve et coagula motto, they were at constant risk of discovery and destruction. A rattling bolt makes you jump. You grip the leather hilt of your dagger and inch toward a back door leading deeper into the tribunal's undercroft. It opens onto a narrow vault lined with wooden racks. There, dozens of sealed jars and files gleam in the dim light, samples of confiscated alchemical materials, bright sulfur, quicksilver beads, distilled mandrake, sap. You clutch the rubedo bead from Section 4 in your pocket and feel its reassuring warmth. The judge outside might brand every drop of quicksilver as devil's blood. But you know its alchemical value outweighs superstition. You slip between the racks, careful not to knock down a jar of powder of projection or essence of salamander, each labeled in trembling script. Fringe tidbit. One jar is said to contain the crushed claws of a werewolf, collected at midnight, though no tribunal doctor ever verified its transformative power. You stow a small vial of mercury-laden tincture beneath your cloak, along with a scrap of the inquisitorial blacklist from Section 11. These artifacts, proof of persecution, might one day vindicate alchemy as a legitimate pursuit. Footsteps thunder above. The judge's voice booms. Bring forth the next tenny who harbor forbidden texts shall suffer the same fate. Ka. You press your body flat against the cold wall, claustrophobia prickling your skin. The cell door opens and heavy boots clump below. A hooded acolyte enters, lantern in hand, humming a penitential hymn. He moves straight to the shelves, his silhouette nearly brushing your shoulder. You realize that a single misstep, a faint cough, could betray your hiding spot. Your pulse slows in a mixture of dread and determination. You've carried smuggled manuscripts across continents, faced furnace and flame in royal courts, distilled plant essences under moonlight, and now you face this tribunal's burning gaze. The alchemist's truth is at stake. Pure gold or the philosopher's soul, you swallow, stealing yourself. When the acolyte passes, you slip from the vault. Talismans clinking softly in your pocket. Emerging into the alley, you pause beneath. A battered sign marking the Inquisitor's hall. The scaffold waits in the square, and the poplar trees sway like silent witnesses to injustice. You draw a deep breath of brine-flecked air and vow to carry these stories forward. To record the courage of those burned for curiosity, to trace the lineage of alchemical thought beyond the pyres and tribunals, whether history will vindicate them as pioneers or brand them as heretics. You know alchemy's legacy defies simple judgment. You tuck your satchel securely under your arm and step into the awakening city, the chance of condemnation fading behind you. Each echo reminds you how fragile pursuit of knowledge can be when tongues sharpen into swords. You sense a flicker of resolve. The secrets of Chrysopoeia, once condemned as dark arts, may yet illuminate the path to modern chemistry. And as you vanish into the crowd, the judge's voice is replaced by the distant hum of markets. Merchant cries and stray sheep a reminder that life, even under the shadow of heresy, finds a way to breathe. You slip from the clamoring market into a narrow alley where lantern glow gives way to the steady glare of oil lamps mounted on shuttered workshops. The air tastes less of brine and fear now, more of chalk dust, wood varnish, and faint fumes. Of burning pitch signs that alchemy is shedding its cloistered robes and stepping into daylight. You pause before a paneled door topped with a painted sign. Laboratory of Chemical Philosophy. Inside, glassware clatters softly. Voices debate ratios, and a gentle heat hums beneath a row of copper stills. The old world of hermetic secrecy begins to unravel here, dissolving into the proto-chemistry we recognize today. You enter and encounter a tall figure bent over a polished stone bench, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. He wields a glass rod stirring a pale green solution in a beaker or precursor to modern acid chemistry. "Welcome," he says, eyes bright with the zeal of inquiry. This is the mid-17th century, the age of Paracelsus's successors and Robert Boyle's experiments. Boyle's 1661 tract, The Skeptical Chemist, argues that matter consists of atoms and clusters, not mystic sulfur-mercury composites, marking a turning point in chemical philosophy, mainstream fact. Historians still argue whether Boyle's work truly severed alchemy's mystical roots or simply repackaged them in Latin treatises. You glance around at the array of glass retorts, its graduated flasks, and polished mortar sets, each labeled in neat script rather than scribbled glyphs. No more goatskin bellows feeding Athenors. Here, fume hoods and charcoal braziers hum with calibrated precision. Light joke number 1. You half wish they'd invented a glassware dishwasher washing. Up after mandrake distillations back in section 9 must have been a nightmare. Instead, assistant scrub beakers with charcoal, powder, and coarse twigs. A rustic predecessor to modern lab sponges. The chemist offers you a small vial of crystalline saltpeter. "We're exploring gunpowder alternatives," he explains, swirling. The vial, our patron claims military might, hinges on pure potassium nitrate. You recall the sulfur piper experiments in section 2 and the mercury trials of section 6. Dangerous mixtures, once cloaked in hermetic secrecy, are now testable reagents in state-funded arsenals. Fringe tidbit. A few die-hard practitioners still whisper of the alkahest, the universal solvent that dissolves all matter, claiming it lurks in ancient Egyptian scrolls, though no modern chemist has distilled a single drop dot at a long wooden table. Another scholar weighs powdered antimony using brass scales. He tells you that antimony sulfide now undergoes standardized assays to measure purity, far from the rampant guesswork where one stray grain could blow a crucible to shards. Light joke number 2. they probably wish for triple beam balances, rather than ear-twisting hacksaw blades to calibrate their weights. Nearby, a pair of apprentices record every detail in leather-bound journals, referencing almanacs rather than cryptic clay tablets. Paracelsian iatrochemistry has morphed into systematic pharmacology, promising cures measured by dose, not divine symbolism. You wander to a corner where printed pamphlets flutter on a rack, those same clandestine manuscripts from Section 11. Now reach wider audiences through the printing press. Italian editions of Geber Summa Perfectionis lie side by side with English translations of Basil Valentine's rose-engraved treatises. The hiss of hot typecasting echoes the furnace clamor of monastic Athenors, but carries a different cadence. Reproducible, distributed, and subject to critique. Historians still argue whether the printing revolution democratized chemical knowledge or diluted alchemy's secret genius into pedestrian recipes for dye and perfume. A sudden clink draws your attention to a foot-powered grinder where a young woman processes cobalt or into brilliant blue pigments. Imagine porcelain glazes and fine inks, she says, scooping turquoise dust into a ceramic bowl. Her deft precision recalls Sister Rowena's Mandrake writes in Section 9 only here. Botanical and mineral processes intertwine in open collaboration rather than whispered alleys. Quirky tidbit. Rumor persists that some guilds tattooed secret pigment formulas on apprentices' skins to smuggle them past rival workshops. Though no chemist has ever claimed metallic ink as body art, you step toward a low bench where a retort glows beneath a small lamp. The chemist from before measures a droplet of aqua fortis nitric acid to a dark glass vial. His assistant adds a strip of silver, and you watch pale green fumes swirl. This is a standard titration test, a far cry from the arcane planetary timings in Section 7, but rooted in the same pursuit of quantifiable transformation. It's mainstream fact. By the late 17th century, chemists recognized acids as distinct substances, moving beyond the four-lumen theory that once dominated alchemy. Scholars debate whether this shift represented a genuine break from tradition or merely a refinement of metaphor into metric. You inhale the tang of acid and chalk, a bracing contrast to the sweet herbal vapors of the apothecary's chamber in Nightseas. Ne care, wab, mame sidi, well ne, in wame. Andra, ne, me size, mame, ne, me, mame, me. All love to live. May, mame, may, my may, to may, to Liz. We you of Kyrie to me, we are you, we I, you I, you I, so I, we I, they I, we I saw I, and I, tiki I, you I, pass you I, demand I, sass, titis, may seek, tick, I'd say, I send statistics, a me, Section 10. The pungent aroma stings your nostrils, reminding you that progress often comes wrapped in discomfort. You move through rows of labeled jars tartaric acid crystals, alum. Sal ammoniakic sample a building block of modern synthetic chemistry. Light joke number 3. No pilgrim's labyrinth here. Clear glass aisles and precise labels to prevent the whole room turning into a scene from a medieval horror show. Beyond the main hall, you find a small lecture room where a chemist lectures to an attentive audience. He holds up a fist-sized chunk of phosphorus, glimmering blue in the lamplight discovered less than a century ago by Hennig Brand. In a quest for the Philosopher's Stone, his discovery of phosphorus in 1669 is a landmark. All matter yields surprises when tested by empirical methods rather than hidden rites. Fringe tidbit. There's a lingering legend that Brand's process began with urine distilled under a full moon, an alchemical echo of Mandrake's lunar lore. Historians still argue whether such eccentric origins were essential to discovery, or simply the stuff of colorful anecdotes. You slip back into the laboratory's main corridor, tracing the transition from dusty crucibles to gleaming porcelain thimbles. The walls are lined with cabinets stuffed with precise glass tubes. Instead of vellum scrolls transforming secrets into substances and recipes into reproducible protocols. You spot a framed motto above the door, Nullius in verba. Take nobody's word for it, a creed of the newly formed Royal Society. The open scrutiny of experiments starkly contrasts the silent secrecy of the Brotherhood in Section 5. It's a sign that alchemy's torch has passed to collective inquiry. Even as some fringe concepts stubbornly cling to moth-eaten corners, at a final bench, you spot a small crucible resting under a draft hood, a ceremonial nod to your earliest encounters. You recall the burnt crucible in Section 2, the cracked clay seal in Section 4, the mercury bead in Section 6. Now, the crucible sits empty, its role supplanted by volumetric flasks and graduated cylinders. Still, you imagine one last experiment. A chemist weighing purity instead of purity's cosmic reflection. The world has moved on, but the labware remains a silent testament to alchemy's legacy. You step back into the soft glow of twilight seeping through tall windows. This chemical workshop, brimming with open debate, measured reactions, and printed treaties, feels worlds apart from the secret nocturnal labs you explored. Yet each furnace, flask, and fragment carries the weight of those medieval seekers. Dreams proof that the boundary between magic and science is thin, porous, and ever-shifting. You slip into a quiet antiquarian library where rows of leather-bound tomes line towering shelves, their gilt spines catching the glow of a single brass lamp. The air smells of aged paper, cedarwood polish, and a hint of goose quill ink, an alchemical cocktail of knowledge and nostalgia. Here, alchemy's fingerprints linger not in steaming crucibles, but in the margins of Enlightenment treatises, whispering that the old arts never truly vanished. You brush fingertips against a vellum folio tucked between geometric texts. Its cover bears the familiar Ouroboros, the snake devouring its own Tela symbol you first saw etched on that clay tablet in Section 5. How many seekers have traced its curve, hoping to swallow life and spit out gold? A stout scholar in a powdered wig peers over spectacles, flipping through Isaac Newton's unpublished notebooks. You join him, astonished to find sprawling alchemical diagrams interwoven with his gravitational equations. Mainstream fact: Newton devoted nearly a third of his life to alchemical research, cataloging hundreds of manuscripts and experimenting with mercury and antimony. Alongside his optical studies, mainstream fact: historians still argue whether his occult pursuits hampered his scientific breakthroughs or secretly informed his concepts of matter and motion. You wonder if gravity works any differently when you've inhaled mercury fumes, but you keep that thought to yourself. The scholar gestures toward a corner where a large folio lies open on an oak lectern. Its pages illustrate the 7 planetary metals: gold for Sol, silver for Luna, lead for Saturn, and so on, symbols you've encountered in glowing lanternlit chambers back in Section 3 and under the turret's astrolabe in Section 7. You trace the symbol for Iona, circle topped by an arrow with your fingertip, marveling at how this simple glyph endured from medieval labs to modern chemistry textbooks. Quirky tidbit: early chemists sometimes used these planetary symbols as shorthand on lab labels, resulting in countless misdumped reagents when an apprentice misread Mercury's symbol for female gender. Oops, not that kind of alchemy. The scholar flips to another page, revealing Newton's hand-drawn series of nested circles labeled Solve et Coagula. The phrase echoes in your mind like a mantra you once whispered late at night over a cracked crucible. Now it stands as a guiding principle for distillation and crystallization techniques in industrial sugar refining. Mainstream fact: by the 18th century, alchemical mottos and processes had been adapted into practical chemical operations, including the large-scale production of sal ammoniac and vitriol in European factories. Mainstream fact. Scholars debate whether these philosophical maxims served as meaningful laboratory guides or as poetic metaphors masking recipe shorthand. A sudden creak from the spiral staircase makes you start still jumpy from that midnight tribunal in section 12. Light joke number 1. You'd think centuries of dusty libraries would dampen your reflexes. But apparently you still flinch at every floorboard. You stride to a corner shelf where an early 18th century chemical treatise stands alongside modern pharmacopoeias. Tucked inside is a slip of paper illustrating a mortar and pestle circled by a phoenix, another motif you first saw carved on that hermetic rod in section 5. It's a silent testament that the old symbols survived the purge of heresy, finding refuge in academic footnotes and secret societies like the Rosicrucians. Fringe tidbit: rumor has it the Freemasons borrowed these phoenix emblems as symbols of rebirth, though they claim it represents building oneself brick by brick, which is arguably less dramatic. You settle into a leather armchair beside a low table strewn with glass vials. A chemist's apprentice places a small vial of concentrated sulfuric acid before you, a direct descendant of medieval vitriol, described in Basil Valentine's 15th century treatise. You recall how monks once distilled oil of vitriol in dusty cloisters, believing it to dissolve all substances into their elemental spirits. Now, industrial acid towers belch fumes outside city limits. Light joke number 2. Medieval alchemists would have loved public hearings on environmental impact. Your Honor, these fumes are just the spirits escaping unburied. Your fingers brush an open volume of Robert Boyle's letters. One letter describes an experiment combining copper filings and nitric acid to produce verdigris of vibrant green used for inks and dyes. Mainstream fact. Boyle's experiments on acids and metals are considered foundational for modern chemical theory, and he is often dubbed the father of modern chemistry for his 1661 work, The Skeptical Chemist. Mainstream fact. Historians still argue whether Boyle's reliance on alchemical terminology ultimately obscured or clarified his contributions to chemistry. You imagine him furrowing his brow over Latin terms, maybe cursing a missing semicolon in his lab notes. You glance up at a faded fresco on the library's vaulted ceiling, depicting a winged figure stirring a cauldron beneath astrological symbols. Light joke number 3. If medieval weather forecasters had a motto, it'd probably be, "May the stars decide if you need an umbrella." The fresco's date is scrawled in tiny letters, 1723. It's a rare piece showing an official endorsement of alchemy by a European university, long after the Inquisition's scourge. You wonder if the painters amusingly hid small runes in the brushstrokes. Perhaps a nod to all those clandestine margins you've learned to read. Your gaze falls on a wooden desk, crowned by a slate blackboard, where a modern chemist has sketched the structural formula for sulfuric acid. You compare it with the medieval pictogram of 3 interlocking circles you saw on that clay tablet in section 5. The difference is astonishing. Chemistry has shifted from symbolic imagery to molecular diagrams. Yet you recognize that both systems aim to map nature's hidden patterns. Scholars debate whether this analytical abstraction lost the poetic unity alchemists cherished or simply improved clarity for reproducibility. You fold the parchment slip, tucking it into your journal beside notes about Newton's antimony trials and Boyle's copper experiments. You think of Sister Rowena's mandrake distillate, the clandestine brotherhood's clay tablets, and the king's vault of Ingersoll, relics of an era when science and sorcery danced a blade-edge waltz. Each symbol you've encountered has been reborn in new contexts. The Ouroboros in chemical journals, the planetary metals in pharmacopoeias, the phoenix in guild emblems. Alchemy's legacy persists in unexpected corners. The amber glow of a school chemistry lab. The icon for the refresh button on your browser, that circular arrow, reminiscent of the Ouroboros, even the term quicksilver still used casually. For Mercury, you rise from the armchair, the lamp's light reflecting off rows of precise volumetric flasks. Modern distillation columns loom in a glossy photograph on the wall, giant industrial versions of those humble alembics you first tiptoed past in sections 1 and 2. The contrast makes your skin tingle, from cloister shadow to factory floor. The pursuit of transformation has never truly ended. You step toward the exit, brushing past a display of antique balances gambling on narrow beams, once the precarious scales that weighed antimony by hand, now replaced by digital promises of accuracy. Before you leave, you pause at the threshold and whisper to the empty hall, "May your symbols keep evolving." The library's silence feels alive, humming with centuries of whispered incantations and meticulous measurements. You sense that alchemy's chatter remains embedded in every beaker and buka. Subterranean current beneath the surface of modern science. You step out into an evening breeze that carries the scent of rain on cobblestone. The setting sun ignites the horizon in molten gold, a celestial reminder of the dreams that first drew monks to crucible flames. In your pocket, the rubedo bead still warms your thigh, echoing the persistent glow of alchemical ambition. You walk away, footsteps soft on the stone, knowing that the old symbols will continue to surface in labs and libraries long after the last deliberate flame has died. Historians still argue whether alchemy's true legacy is scientific method or a poetic quest for meaning. Perhaps it is both, entwined like the serpent on that clay tablet, forever chasing its tail. You step into the courtyard just as a pale ribbon of dawn knits the horizon, dew kissing your boots as you tread the forgotten path of the monastery garden. The empty Athenor stands like a slumbering giant, its ash bed cold and silent, a memory of crackling coals and triumphant glimmers of rubedo bead. The smell of whetstone drifts from the cloister walls, weaving with the faint aroma of rosemary still clinging to fallen petals. In this quiet hour, you pause, mindful of every echo you gathered, Mercury's hiss that nearly stole your breath, Mandrake's phantom sigh. The secret codes passed beneath you shadows. As morning light slides across the marble bench, you notice the copper alembic's curve glinting faintly. Mercury's chemical symbol, Hg, still recalls its alchemical name, hydrodrome liquid, silver reminding you that medieval metaphors endure in modern laboratories. Mainstream fact. A stray rose petal drifts from the trellis above, landing by the cracked mortar where you once ground cinnabar and bone ash. You brush it aside, thinking of how modern perfumers sometimes swear that alembic-shaped flasks yield sweeter essential oils, a quirky belief echoing ancient fringe lore. You wander toward the library's window, where printed labels on glass jars recall the hush of vellum scrolls you smuggled through dusty warehouses. The phrase "solve et coagula" whispers through your mind, a mantra that guided both crucible and chromatography. Historians still argue whether alchemy's symbology obstructed empirical clarity or provided the imaginative scaffold that allowed modern chemistry to flourish. You feel both pulled toward cold precision and the whispering poetry of ancient diagrams. A gentle breeze stirs an old parchment pinned beneath a stone bench, the very sheet illustrating planetary hours and nigredo. From the turret's chamber, You fold it with reverence and slip it into your satchel alongside the clay tablet and the ruby bead that warmed your thigh through so many nights. You recall the hush of the secret brotherhood's chants, the clamor of royal applause, and the hiss of tribunal fire. Each moment carved a mosaic of human hope and fear in transformation's name. You recall the first crackle of a lime flower furnace and the last flash of phosphorus glowing in Boyle's test tube. You recall Newton's fevered nights mapping antimony, the clinking balance scales that weighed out silver for verdigris. Now, in this dawnlit courtyard, you see those moments woven into every sunrise. Modern chemists calibrate masses with digital accuracy, yet the pulse of alchemical ambition still hums beneath the rhythm of titration. In every school laboratory, the word alembic lingers on as a poetic nod to that ancient art. A bird trills from the rooftop. And you realize that alchemy's greatest legacy may be this inexhaustible curiosity. It taught seekers to look for hidden properties in common matter and to believe that the ordinary might conceal the extraordinary. Today, scientists decode crystals and split atoms with instruments unimaginable to medieval hearts. But the spark of wonder is the same spark that once flickered at the furnace's rim. Fringe whispers suggest that true alchemy never died. It merely transformed, passing from hermetic symbols into molecular graphs, shape-shifting as matter itself. You stand, stretching muscles stiff from nights at the furnace, and breathe deeply of the moist morning air. The dew glints like scattered gold dust across the flagstones. You feel the weight of centuries in your satchel, the collected tokens of 1,000 experiments and secret meetings. The courtyard seems to exhale around you, as if the stones recall every whispered incantation and every measured scale. In this delicate balance between myth and method, you glimpse a shimmering truth, that the boundary between magic and science is not a wall, but a mirror. Reflecting the yearning to know and to change, you turn toward the abbey's rosewood door. Sunlight pooling at your feet. Each step carries the legacy of those who lit midnight lamps to chase the gleam of perfection. In the quiet of dawn, you sense their voices echoing, not in chants about demons or gold, tea, but in the simple, endless question, how far can we reach into matter and emerge changed? The courtyard stands witness, dew still clinging to petals, to crucibles, to ancient graffiti on mossy stone. You lift your hand, brushing it across the cold marble, as if sealing a pact with every alchemist who ever dared to dream, and as you step into the emerging day, you carry with you the promise and peril of that age-old dance with fire and spirit. You move forward, back into a world of microscopes and mass spectrometers, of patent offices and peer review. Armed with the knowledge that the seeds sown by medieval alchemists still sprout in every discovery. The degrees of Saturn or the gleam of Jupiter may have faded from lab manuals, but the urge to solve, to coagulate, to transform persists glowing quietly beneath the cold precision of modern science. As you settle into your bed, you let the full weight of history unfurl in your mind, reaching beyond the flicker of your bedside lamp and stretching back through centuries of crucibles and midnight rituals. The hush of dripping water in some hidden laboratory seems to echo in your ears, reminding you that every measured scale once carried the hopes of alchemists chasing golden transmutation. You draw a slow, steady breath and feel the gentle pulse of transformation beneath your skin, the same pulse that melds myth and method in alchemy's enduring legacy. Pale moonlight filters through your curtains, casting soft shadows that dance like alchemical symbols on your walls. In this calm, you realize that the quest for understanding is as intimate as the rise and fall of your heartbeat. You allow each thought to unravel slowly, trusting that tomorrow's clarity will blossom from tonight's quiet reflection. Your eyelids grow heavy as the night's soft embrace holds you in balance between consciousness and dreams, and you let go of every expectation you carried into the story's closing scenes. The lessons you've gathered from Mercury's shimmering lure and Mandrake's whispered secrets. Of printed scrolls smuggled under goatskin horns and crimson beads. Distilled at dawn, float gently through your thoughts like autumn leaves drifting on a silent pond. Each memory settles softly, layering itself in the quiet chambers of your mind, forming a tapestry woven from curiosity, courage, and wonder. You recognize that even if you never ignite another Athenor or inscribe a single glyph, the spirit of alchemy will remain in your breath, in the pattern of your dreams, in the way morning light filters into every new beginning. In this suspended moment, you sense that knowledge itself is an alchemical process, a transformation of questions into understanding, of yearning into acceptance, and of script. Sweet dreams.